In this video, we're going to look at the homework assignment, continuous graphs, intervals. So starting with the first graph, we're going to find the 5 different intervals, positive and negative, and then increasing, decreasing, and constant. Let's start with positive. What we want to remember is the positive piece of the graph is any section that is above the x-axis. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a little box around anything above the x-axis. So this piece here is above the axis, and this piece here. So you should see that those two sections are above the axis. Now to name the positive intervals, I'm now going to look at the x-axis on the numbers. So I start with -4. Oops, bring that back. And then the box ends at -1. Then we have another box that starts at +1 and ends at +3. Therefore, my positive intervals are -4, -1, and 1, 3. Again, we only go off the x-axis numbers. Now we're going to switch it. So instead of above the x-axis, we're going to go below the x-axis for our negative intervals. Clear this. Now below the x-axis, I'm going to place a box here so I completely capture that entire piece that's below. And I'm going to put another box here. So I have these two boxes. I'm going to do the same thing. This first one started at -5 and went to -4. The second one went from -1 to +1. So my negative intervals, -5, -4, and -1, +1. And what you'll notice about our positive and negative intervals is the numbers are going to alternate. So the graph starts at -5. Then at -4, it switches. See how those have the same number? -1, it switches back, and +1, it switches back. So if you've done it correctly, a lot of your numbers are going to be in the same. The beginning number for a positive interval should be the ending number for a negative interval, and vice versa. Now we're going to do increasing. So I'm going to draw another box, but this time I want to capture the piece of my graph that is going upwards. So if I'm looking at it, from here to here, that's an upward motion. So that's what I want to include in my box. Narrow that one in a little bit. So see, I can see that it's too far out. My box contains pieces that aren't actually there. It starts here and goes there. And then it also goes up in this rectangular strip. So you should be able to see that in both of these sections, our graph is going up. In this piece and in this piece. Just like with our positive and negative intervals, we're specifically going to look at these numbers. This one goes from -5 to -3. And here there's no number, so that's 0 to 2. Our increasing intervals, -5 to -3, and then 0 to 2. Now our decreasing intervals, that's where that graph is going down. So that is going to be, the graph goes down all the way to here. Oops. And here. So I want to draw my strips to capture those two pieces. Here's one strip, and here's another one. That one, we'll close that in a little bit. Here. So that's going to be from -3 to 0 again, and from +2 to +3. The last type of interval we have is a constant, and that means my graph is going completely straight. So I should see a line like this. I don't have that anywhere in my graph. So for constant intervals, I'm going to say none. So here are all my intervals for the first graph. And if you go to the PowerPoint where all the answers are, you can see that broken up as well. Our positives are negatives, increasing, decreasing, and nothing for constant. Let's take a look at graph 2 now. So here I'm going to have some arbitrary decimals. We're just going to try to estimate those. So starting with positive, I'm going to do positive and negative together now. Positive is above the axis. So it's positive from -2. It's still positive. I'm going to keep moving to 0. Then it switches to negative until here. Switches back to positive. In this section. And switches back to negative until here. And it finishes up positive in this little strip. So these are our positive and negative intervals. It's not enough for us to just color them though. We do have to put an answer, list those numbers. So first positive, -2 to 0. This is about 2.5 to, let's say, 5.2, and 6.7 to 7. -2 to 0, 2.5 to 5.2, 6.7 to 7. Bring that back. And these decimals might be slightly different from the ones you got, as long as they're around that number. Now our negative intervals, and we're starting at 0 now, and going to 2.5, starting at 5.2, and going to 6.7. As you can see, because we were switching back and forth, our negatives were basically these here. They're that empty space in between our positive intervals. Do increasing, decreasing, and constant. So I'm going to do increasing in green. Anytime my graph goes up, I'll color it in green. If it goes down, in red. If it's constant, switch it to orange. So here our graph goes up, and then it starts going down. And then it goes up again. Then back down. And then back up. So these pieces are our intervals. We just need to number them. So this section was increasing. This section was decreasing. Increasing in this piece. Decreasing in this piece. And then increasing in that piece. So numbers. -2 to -1 was increasing. 2 to 4 was increasing. And 6 to 7 was increasing. -1, 2, and 4, and 6 to 7. Decreasing is all what we're doing in between there. So decreasing from -1 to 2 and from 4 to 6. And nowhere in the graph were we ever going straight, so constant intervals. Again, none. That is it for graph number 2. Let's take a look at graph number 3 now. Positive. So this one's a little bit different because we have those arrows at the end. So we're going to be cautious of those when we do our intervals. So first, the pieces above the axis are positive pieces. It is positive from here to here. And from about here, I need to fix that, to the very end. And then negative starts off negative actually. Color that. And it's negative in this little section. So for our first negative piece, that's an arrow. So when we get to our negative intervals, that's going to be a negative infinity. It's an arrow on the negative side of our equation. But we want to start with positive. Now that's going to be about -7.5. Here's where's -7 would be. And so it's in between -7 and -8. And we're going to go until about -4.5 or -4.6, in between -4 and -5. And then we are before -1. That's about -0.8. And because it ends with an arrow, we're going to end with infinity. Now our negative intervals. We start at an arrow, so we're going to start at negative infinity and go to -7.5, then -4.6 to -0.8. And that last one, we're just getting those numbers from here. So those are our negative and positive intervals. And if you ever start with an arrow, that's negative infinity. If you end with an arrow, that is positive infinity. Now, increasing, decreasing, constant. We go up, start going down. Now, here's what constant looks like. Not going up or down, we're going completely straight. We go up again. And then we continue going straight. Here are our strips to cover that. Up in this section. Now we're going down. then straight, back up, and straight to the end. So with our increasing intervals, remember anytime we started an arrow that is negative infinity. Then we go to -6. Then our second piece is -1 to 0. Started in an arrow, ended at -6, -1 to 0. We only have one decreasing interval, and that's from -6 to -4. Then there's two constant intervals, from -4 to -1, and then from 0 to infinity. You can see -4, -1, 0, then ends in an arrow. So that is it for graph number 3. Graph number 4. We're going to start off positive again. So here's where my graph begins. And it's positive. And keep coloring it until it stops being positive. There. Switches to negative. Switches back to positive. So if it helps, I'm going to put these numbers in. Center is always 0, -1, -2, -3, 1, 2, 3. Our positive interval went from -3 to 0. And then from about 2.5 to 3. -3 to 0, and 2.5 to 3. You've noticed we always separate our intervals with this U symbol. It means union, which is basically another way to saying and. Now our negative intervals, just one, from 0 to 2.5. Now we can do increasing, decreasing, and constant. Our graph starts going up, so we begin by increasing. Actually, I lied, it does not, it starts constant. So when our graph begins, we're just going straight from here to here. And then our graph starts dropping down. It's dropping lower and lower and lower. And then here it stops dropping down and starts going straight again. And straight, straight, straight. And then finally it starts going up. Up this entire piece. So here are our increasing, decreasing, and constant interval strips. Increasing, it only did that at the very end, from about 2 to 3. Decreasing, it did once in the middle, from -1 to +1. Let me put those numbers back so we can see. And then there are two constant intervals. One of them started at -3 and went to -1. And the other one went from 1 to 2. Here are our intervals for graph number 4. Look at graph number 5 now. This is a little interesting. We start with positive. Positive from here to about here. Now here, we're positive here, here, here. And I'm actually going to draw a new interval once we get to 3. The reason why is because even though it's going to go back to positive, anytime it hits the axes, it stops being whatever it is. It ends the interval. So I'm going to end that interval and just start a new one there. To the end. And then we are negative in this little baby piece over here. Wrong color. So positive intervals, we start at an arrow, so that's negative infinity to negative 4. Then we go from negative 2 to 3, and because of that x-intercept, we had to restart from 3 to infinity. Negative intervals is just from negative 4 to negative 2. And here are those numbers on that graph. Negative 4 to negative 2 for our negative interval. Negative 2 to 3 for one of our positives. And then the infinities. Let's look at the increasing, decreasing constants. We start off by decreasing in that section there. Then we start going up again. Head back down. And then right back up. So let's do our increasing. That first piece goes from negative 3 and then a little bit past 0. So I'll say that's 0.2. And then the second piece starts at 3 and it ends with an arrow. So that's going to be infinity. Decreasing starts at an arrow. So that's negative infinity. Ends at negative 3 and then 0.2 to 3. There was no constant intervals in this graph. And the one last graph for this video, let's look at graph number 6. So positive intervals, again, positive means above the x-axis. So that is this piece and this piece and this piece. Negative intervals below the x-axis, that piece, and this one. If it's on the x-axis, it is neither. So here was negative 5. So we're actually going to start at negative 7 and go to negative 5 for our first interval. The second one is at about 2, 6, 7. This is 7, so it's a little bit past 7, closer to 8. This is before 11, ending at 12. So my positive intervals, negative 7 to negative 5. That one was easy to see. then 2 to about 7.7, and then about 10.8 to 12. Our negative intervals, -5 and about -3, 0 to 2, and then 7.7 to 10.8. So those are our positive and negative intervals. And notice, never did I ever use these numbers on the y-axis. They have no place in our intervals. Now let's do increasing, decreasing, and constant to finish up. Start off decreasing in this first strip. Then we do increase for a bit, just a little. Switch over to constant. Back to decreasing. And then we have a good set stream of increase. Decrease again though, and then increase at the very end. So our increasing sections. First one starts at about -4 to -3. Then we go from 1 to 5, and then from 8 through 12. Decreasing. That is -7 to -4, 0 to 1, and 5 to 8. And lastly, there's that one constant interval from -3 to 0. So here are all of our intervals for the continuous graphs intervals homework. Hopefully that helps. You can always look at the PowerPoint as well to see these extra slides that show you the intervals one at a time.